This time on Poll Hub, what's happening in the states? Everybody focuses on national polls, but since presidents aren't elected nationally, what we really want to keep an eye on is what's happening in the states, especially competitive states that flip between voting for Democrats and Republicans. So far, almost all the polls of the Trump era have been national, but now we have 3 new state polls, and we're going to unpeel the onion. But first, Hurricane Harvey, the massive storm, has Houston underwater, but pollsters are getting ready to survey. It's happened before. Katrina, Sandy, 9/11. What's possible? But what's also appropriate? Let's get started. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, and joining us as always is
Barbara Carvalho from Marist College campus in Poughkeepsie, New York,
where it is not raining, and we do want to talk about a huge, unbelievable storm. And it's amazing how often we've talked about these kinds of things in the last few years, of storms being bigger than they've ever been, once in a generation, millennial storms. But this one, 50-plus inches of rain, Houston underwater. The reason we're talking about it is because polling happens after things like this. And there's a lot of questions that you guys go through with when do you ask questions, why do you ask questions, how do you ask questions? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, and I think we're getting a little too much practice at this of having to sit down in the face of some kind of tragedy and figure out, when is it appropriate to do what in terms of that. We faced this at 9/11. We faced it with Hurricane Sandy, and now, of course, with the Hurricane Harvey. And I think there's different issues that it raises. I think there's sensitivity issues, and then there's technical issues. Can you do it if you want to conduct a poll? And so I think those are some of the things that we've gone through over the years. And I think, I think back to 9/11 and that period, which was, after all, during a mayoralty campaign. And so we had to weigh public opinion, sensitivity, electoral behavior, which was coming up, and the recovery, and all those things had to go into the mix. So I think it was very difficult time recognizing what the city was going through and what's happening right now in Houston.
And I think each case is probably different and needs to be evaluated in terms of what's going on. Who are the victims? I mean, we're thinking Hurricane Harvey right now and other natural disasters like Sandy. But you bring up 9/11. We also have other moments such as Charlottesville, where you get the country's attention, and so we want to quantify how as Americans we feel about it.
Right. In those cases, in the case of Charlottesville or something like that, you're able to talk to Americans who aren't immediately impacted. I think 9/11 is a great example. And Lee, it's a great thing to remember that 9/11 happened on primary election day for mayor of New York, which people in New York may remember, but the rest of the country doesn't. Sure. But there was a responsibility then to go out and to poll because you needed to know that the election didn't get called off. So I think there was still a primary. There was still an election.
It was postponed. It was postponed.
It was postponed, but it still went forward. And then there was election where Mayor Bloomberg became mayor only 2 months later. And I think a lot of people forget that. How did you poll in that circumstance?
Well, I think the first thing we spoke about, and we were actually getting ready for the primary coverage that day, so in a sense our political antenna was definitely up. But I think the first paramount concern was the sensitivity issue. And do you want to be talking?
Were we going to be intruding?
Yeah. Do you want to be talking to people who during that time it was just beyond anything that the city had experienced, and we had to go through that thought process. And I think when we first did go to the phones and start serving was about 2 weeks after, as I remember, and we briefed the students and interviewers as to let's be hypersensitive about this. And what we found out was that people had a lot on their minds, and they really, really wanted to talk about it. And so our concerns, in a sense, although appropriate, were not correct in that people were not, feeling intruded upon by us interviewing them. They were just incredibly eager to share with someone what they had been experiencing.
Now, we could quantify, not only their feelings about it, but also the fact that they wanted to participate, because we could could estimate response rates and how cooperative people were to talk about the issues. But it's not unlike, I bet, what you have experienced, Jay, in the media covering these kinds of events. Because on the one hand, especially with Hurricane Harvey, people have said, oh, the media has just descended upon us and they're just, sticking cameras and microphones in our face and, they should give us some privacy. But on the other hand, the fact that you're publicizing this, that you're bringing the country into this event, also presents an opportunity. So in terms of, you actually covered 9/11, you've covered other natural disasters. What's your take on it?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, just as it is for you guys, is that the story needs to be told and people want to tell their story, but many people that you talk to are also reluctant to jump in front of the camera or to talk to you or to really express themselves in in a really deep extent because they're so shaken. It's funny, you go back to 9/11, and I remember that we were all very reluctant. I was a political reporter, right? So although after 9/11 I was covering, every day, all day, the aftermath, following the governor and Mayor Giuliani as they did things that were not overtly political, right? This is recovery of a city from an attack, a foreign attack. Yet politics interceded very quickly. You'll remember that Mayor Giuliani floated the idea of extending his term.
Right, he was term limited.
Let's
yes.
postpone the election because this is such a historic thing that has happened that you should let me remain mayor at least for a few more months. That put politics back in, and I was then required to go ask people who were still in shock that there was a smoking pile of rubble with thousands of people dead a few blocks away or a mile downtown, and we had to go out and ask people, what do you think about Mayor Giuliani? And people wanted to talk about it. They were eager to talk about it, and it wasn't a popular idea, but they were eager to talk about it. And I think that gets to your point, is that we can be very reluctant and fearful, like, oh, we're going to intrude. We should just let people have their peace. But I think you can be respectful of that. And when people want to talk, they're going to talk, and everybody else, I think, has a right to hear what people have to say.
And we did poll on that very question about whether people wanted to change the rules to keep America's mayor a little bit longer in New York. And the answer was, as you said, it wasn't a popular idea, and they didn't want to change the rules despite the favorable reaction people had to what he was doing.
To what he did.
As mayor.
Yeah, to what he did. Everybody liked Giuliani at that moment, but
didn't want to change
we don't really want you to be mayor any longer. We're a democracy, and we can actually withstand this and have an election. I remember that response in particular from someone who said, I voted for him twice. I love the guy. I think he's doing a great job, but we lose to the terrorists if we blow up our election process in order to keep him mayor for a few more months for the sake of stability, which we don't need that.
And I want to add one other point on this. In a time when the media is under fire for everything it's doing under the fake news headline, during crises like this, what we're seeing right now in Houston and what certainly in 9/11, and I know you were one of those reporters, the press don't run away from the event, they run towards the event. And I know you live not that far from 9/11, and you go towards the smoke because you feel a responsibility as a reporter to cover the event for the broader public. And I think, in this day and age, certainly that's something that can be said over and over again.
And also, I think just from a technical perspective, both professional journalists and professional pollsters, we're concerned about intruding, and we ask permission. So when you do see results from polls, or you see someone speaking and doing an interview, the likelihood is that they have been asked permission to do that.
So how do you poll in a case of Harvey where the city is underwater? Many people are not in their homes. Those that are undoubtedly don't have electricity, may not have phone service. Cell service is apparently spotty. How do you actually go about polling if you wanted to poll Houstonians?
And I think that is a a technical problem from a polling perspective. Cell phones do make it a little bit easier because if people have found refuge, they are still connected in that way. So that is a little bit different than what we've had in previous events, like during Sandy or certainly in 9/11, when everything was really shut down and there wasn't even anything called an iPhone. Those were, I think, BlackBerry days. And so that has changed it. But I think that certainly there's a technical problem of speaking to people who live in Houston and who have been directly affected. But that doesn't mean we can't talk about it as a country and also ask people about the issues which come up.
Yeah.
So what about, evacuation? What about the issue of federal government paying and supporting
These are important political issues.
The cleanup. And so I think what Houston brings to the fore is that it can happen anywhere.
Yeah, and I think these decisions are not unique to the media. It's not unique to the polling company. I remember back when I was young, the assassination of John F. Kennedy as president occurs on a Friday. Do you play professional football on Sunday or not? In the case of sports events, in the case of does Saturday Night Live after 9/11, do they then discontinue? When does the network go back to a David Letterman show, or for example? And can these things that feel normal and might feel a little odd under other circumstances actually be appropriate given the way people are feeling?
And we can measure that.
There's been so much coverage during the Trump term so far about his national poll numbers. There's several daily approval-disapproval ratings. Lots of talk about what Republicans think of him nationally. The people who were not necessarily Republicans but voted for him, what they think about him, what Democrats think. But what we learned, and we learn every election year on election night, is that national polls can only tell you so much because we have a thing called the Electoral College, and elections are won or lost by the state at the state level. You guys are the first out of this term to do some really hardcore digging into states that matter. And I've been waiting for this for a few months.
Well, these were the key states.
And what's happening?
Well, I think a lot of what's happening in the states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, which we picked clearly because they were the three states that the 80,000 votes occurred in that put Trump over the top. These are the ones that elected him. And we look at those three states because these were the surprises on election night. And right now, the president's approval rating is in the mid to low 30s in each of these three states and over 50% disapproving.
Which is the same as the national numbers.
So he's having trouble in the states that made the difference for him in last November.
Well, Michigan, he's actually at 36%. And then Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, he's at 33% in each of those.
But what are his supporters in those states? I think one of the things that caught people by surprise was that in counties and districts that had gone for Barack Obama, and white working class voters who had voted for Barack Obama did not vote for Hillary Clinton. They voted for Donald Trump in these states, some of these states. What are those supporters who are not nominally Republicans? They may not even be nominally Democrats, but they made the difference. What are they saying?
He's not doing so well among that group of voters at all.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we're looking at when we look at the Trump administration nationally, and certainly within these three critical states, is how's he doing among his base? Because the conventional wisdom is the base is intact. He hasn't been able to reach out to pick up any support, but the base is good for him. So that's what he's doing to keep pitching it to the base. And what we're seeing among Republicans, around 30% in each of these three states say that they're embarrassed by his administration.
30% of Republicans say
And
they're embarrassed.
Yes, and overall you're talking at more than 60% nationwide, but in Michigan it's 27%, in Pennsylvania 32%, Wisconsin 31%. These are Republicans who say they're embarrassed by President Trump. That's not a good sign for the future for the president.
What is embarrassed versus proud? That's a question you asked, and it's a way to get, as opposed to approve, disapprove. What's the idea behind that?
I think it gives us a better sense of how people feel emotively, where when we ask approve, disapprove, we're trying to get a sense of their evaluation of him doing his job as president. I think embarrassed and proud kind of gets at that gut feeling of how you think the president is representing the country.
But he's still broadly popular with Republicans in these three states, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, and he should be. I mean, if it wasn't that, then the whole game's over. But I think what we're seeing in these states, and one of the reasons, to get back to your original question, that these were such eye-opening states in November, was that he had made this promise that he was going to do something about the Rust Belt. And he was going to return jobs, manufacturing jobs, to this area. So we asked in this poll, is he winning or losing on this promise to return jobs to these states? And in each case, a plurality or majority felt that he was losing, not winning, and that the process of restoring these economies in these states, the Rust Belt states, is not going the way he had promised. So that's, again, a warning sign.
And that comes on the heels. Remember that one of the first things he did before he was even he had even been sworn in was the Carrier deal, right? In Indiana, I believe, right? The Carrier air conditioner. They were going to move the factory to Mexico, pick up and leave, and he swooped in, and they did a big day around it. Got a lot of press attention around the idea that he had kept them from moving to Mexico, and the jobs would stay. And then sometime this summer, it was announced, well, actually, the jobs are still going. Is that the kind of thing that is starting to kind of catch up to him with his hardcore supporters in these states? Is that they've given him the benefit of the doubt, and many still do apparently, but there's only so much benefit they will give him.
Well, I think we should be somewhat cautious in talking about how how he might do in a future electoral sense, because you still need to. It's still a choice. It still becomes a choice, when people go in to vote. So he still has a lot of positive support among his core, but I think what we're seeing is that there has been a decline in how they think he's actually fulfilling his campaign promises. And that's where things are starting to crack.
And does that say to anything to Democrats at all, who, of course, are already thinking about 2020, put 2018 aside, where we've got Senate races, does that tell you anything, or does that tell Democrats anything in 2020 about what they need to do or should be doing, or what the candidate, whoever the party nominates, should be doing? I know this is really far ahead, but it's already everybo's already thinking about it.
And it's already a discussion among some Republicans as to whether this is the horse they want to ride through. In 2018 will certainly be very telling. But the Democrats have their own issues. I mean, both parties are pretty fractured. They both have two very different sides to each of the parties, a more traditional, moderate, center part of the party, and then either a left or a right, Democrat, Republican, respectively, part of the party. So the Democrats have their own problems. I think it certainly presents an opportunity for them, but if they can they
capitalize on that? Yeah, I just think that it's a really, really important point, and will become more so. I mean, for both parties, is the Rust Belt the next battleground, or is it the Sun Belt? Are people going to look to areas that they thought Hillary Clinton was going to do a little better in, has done a little better perhaps in some states, getting a little bit more competitive? Is that a better place for the Democrats and the Republicans? Or are we going to go back, and are Democrats and Republicans going to go back to these three states which the Democrats had carried in each of the last 6 presidential elections. And that's why it was such a shocker for a lot of people when Hillary Clinton didn't carry them this time.
Right, and that gets at something that both pollsters and politicians and the political press run into, which is always fighting the last war, running the last election. So you guys are always looking at, well, look, we can only look at the numbers from the last election, but the electorate's different. We in the media, we're always looking for some sort of kind of validation, right, for a guess or a theory that politicians or political pundits are putting out. And so where can you go? Well, you look to the past. Well, John McCain did such and such versus Barack Obama, but then Obama did better in some states than Mitt Romney, then blah, 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 blah. And then 2016 happens and all the rules are rewritten.
We throw all that out the window.
Yeah.
This year more so than even other presidential elections.
So is 2020, is that a mistake already talking about 2020, thinking about it in terms of 2016? Your point, are we talking about the Rust Belt when everybody should really be talking about the Sun Belt or, Alaska, or I don't know.
Don't know. We don't know, but I think right now we're still that's on the table to be considered. And I think both parties and everybody's sort of saying, well, what has Donald Trump done to the political universe? And part of the answer strategically will be based on what people think. Was this a new normal? Was it an aberration? What did it all mean? When was it mean going forward?
And people still think we need to drain the swamp. And I think that's key. Whether that translates into some kind of, electoral change again, because we've had a number of change elections. It feels like every cycle we have a new normal. So I think you're right to look at 2020 as if it were 2016 is going to be a clear mistake for both parties.
So the one thing that we can say though is make sure you're looking at the state polls. As people do state polls, because the state polls nationally will tell you one thing, but the state polls are going to be where you begin to understand, is 2016 like 2020, or is 2020 like 2016, or is 2020 a whole new ball of wax?
And in 2 of the last 5 presidential elections, the person who won the popular vote didn't become president.
Right, and that national poll reflects the popular vote, but maybe the popular vote is not so meaningful anymore, because as you just said, we have a whole new normal. That'll do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at beautiful Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Our executive producer is Mary Griffith. Our editor is Annabelle Lau.
And we don't necessarily have all the answers, but we sure would like to have your questions. Please send them to pollhub@marist.edu.
And of course, you can check us out on social media at Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll on Facebook, Snapchat, and Instagram. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcast.
See you next time.